Welcome to the Business Book Challenge by the Coaching Network. My name is Maria Medina, and I'm a business and networking coach. And today we are going to be talking about Never Split the Difference by Voss. He draws from his experiences as being an FBI hostage negotiator. So this was definitely an interesting read, and I look forward to going through all the little details that he teaches us in order to improve our communication, but also improve how we understand other people in order to better our negotiation skills. One of the techniques that Voss uses is called tactical empathy. And I know a lot of people struggle with showing empathy without agreeing with somebody else's feelings or emotions or thoughts. And what Chris mentions here is that you don't have to agree in order to understand and show the other person that you see where they're coming from. You understand and you acknowledge their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions. You don't have to necessarily agree with what they're going through, but that tactical empathy helps you build that bridge, that rapport, relationship building factor when you're speaking with somebody that maybe they're coming from a different perspective to yours, and you're able to then just communicate with them a little bit more effectively by understanding where they're coming from, acknowledging, even if you don't agree with their feelings, just acknowledging that you understand, yes, this is how you feel. I understand why you would feel that way. You're using that empathy to see it from their perspective. And I like the quote that I often use, which is seek first to understand and then be understood. And I've used this before because you want to know what the other person is experiencing so that you can find the best method of communication to engage with them in, and also to understand what their motivators are. What is it that they're trying to get out of this conversation, of this relationship? And if you treat them with empathy, you're then able to motivate them, persuade them, and figure out ways that are going to benefit both of you. But you're going to find a way to help them realize what this conversation should be achieving, empathizing with what they are feeling or what they are trying to accomplish. As you're empathizing with whoever it is that you're communicating with, mirroring is another technique that comes into conversation in this book. And it talks about how you can repeat what the person said back to them so that they see that you're actually listening and actively engaging in the conversation. So when you're mirroring, not only are you trying to show them, hey, I'm listening, I'm trying to understand, but you're also trying to encourage them to share additional information with you and clarify. If you're asking, this is what I think you said, what I'm understanding from what you're saying is A, B, C, then they're able to also clarify, which improves that communication because you're saying, I'm trying to understand you. This is what I got from our conversation. Am I right? Am I wrong? If I'm wrong, let's continue the conversation so that I can get a little bit more clarity and actually understand what you're trying to get out of this conversation, what you're trying to get out of this relationship and this engagement that we're practicing in. So by mirroring, not only are you showing active listening because, hey, I just listened to your whole conversation. This is what I believe you're trying to say, what you're trying to get out of it. Let's continue this conversation so that we get to a point where we both feel comfortable with the outcome. Something that I really got out of this book and my upcoming discussion with Susan Burke was labeling feelings and talking about the feelings that the other person is feeling, as well as labeling your own feelings to ensure that there is that level of comfort, vulnerability, and we're sharing with each other. So if you see that somebody is sharing with some sort of emphasis, or they might not be necessarily labeling their emotion as an anger or frustration, and Voss uses the example of frustration, but from their body language, the words that they're using, if you're able to label and say, hey, I see that you're feeling a little bit frustrated or aggravated with how this conversation's going or with the situation overall, how do we work forward from this? You're acknowledging that you're understanding their words, their body language. They don't have to necessarily name the emotion for you to understand them, but you're putting that comfort level there to start labeling emotions so that you can understand then how to deal with them. What is the appropriate way forward? Do we need to step back? Do we need to add additional information to this conversation to help it move forward? Do we need to communicate further? Do you need to tell me additional information so that that frustration is gone and you're able to get out all the information that you're trying to get? What is it that you're actually feeling? Label that emotion and try and get complex. Don't try and do just, I'm afraid, I'm sad, I'm happy. Try and get those more complex emotions. Feel guilty, I feel despair. What are those other complex emotions that stem from the overall arcing anger? Why do you feel that anger? What type of anger is it? Is it you're frustrated? Is it anger out of skepticism? Is it anger out of jealousy? Where is that anger coming from? And the more you dig deep into this, the better you will be getting at reading other people's emotions and then being able to handle them so that you know which route is the best route to take when you're trying to engage with them in conversation. When we're talking about sales, a lot of people feel really discouraged by receiving that no or that rejection. And something the book touches upon is saying that no is actually a conversation starter. It's not an end all be for this conversation. It's a way to start learning more information, whether that is, let's say you're trying to sell a product or service. They say they are not interested. Is it a learning opportunity? Can I learn why are you not interested? Is it a price thing? Is it a product or service? What is it that's stopping that relationship from going forward? Or is it a no where we have to, as Voss says, ask the question, which says, what would make this a yes for you? What do you need from me? What sort of a negotiation do I need to bring to the table in order to close this deal? So no isn't always the end of the conversation. It could be a start and a learning opportunity. And I think that's how a lot of salespeople need to take it going forward. Learn from those no's. Learn from the people that aren't replying. Is it because you're contacting them at a certain time on a certain day and they're busy? Is it because they don't want to close that conversation, so they're not replying to say no? They want to keep that conversation going and that relationship building. So engage in a different conversation with them, not just the sale. So how can you support them and add value in a different way? And as you're learning from these no's, you're able to then improve your pitch going forward, improve how you communicate with other people, and the value proposition that you offer overall. Stemming from that is the conversation ender and it not being the end all be all for this conversation. What you want to also start doing is ask calibrated questions. What would make this a better proposition for you? Ask open-ended questions that put the responsibility on the other person to show you how they believe that they should get value out of this interaction. Ask those open-ended questions. Ask how they believe that you should be addressing the issue. Ask those questions that engage in conversation and encourage them to share as much information with you as possible. The more information that you're able to get from the other party and the more responsibility that you're able to put on them to show you the right way for this conversation or this relationship, the better versed you're going to be when communicating with them, and the better prepared you're going to be when you come to show them an offering of what they want. If essentially, and with this book, you're talking about his FBI experiences with hostage negotiators, you're not always going to be able to give them what they want. But what is a good way forward for this relationship to carry on? What is it that they are expecting out of the relationship? And I often try and encourage this with my clients where I ask them to visualize, what does that look like? Explain that to me, show me, because then you're actively engaging them in thinking, oh, this is what I want. Is it possible? Is it achievable? Am I asking too much of this person? And that's where those realizations come. And in that conversation, you're asking them to really think about what it is that they're asking. And we touched a little bit upon this next principle when I was talking about naming those feelings. And it's the principle that is 7-38-55, where Voss says that 7% of communication is based on the actual words spoken, 35% is based on the tone, and 55% on the body language. When you are engaging in conversation with somebody, you want to be paying attention to everything that they're communicating with you. Sometimes it's hard when it's a digital world and all you see is the little square, but you can tell things by the words that they're saying as well as the tone in which they're saying it. And are they sitting back and crossing their arms when they're having a conversation with you? This applies in person and in the digital world. When you're looking at people, are they being interactive? Are they really engaging in the conversation, leaning forward, wanting to tell you more? Or are they leaning back? What are they doing as well with their tone? Is it a muted tone where they're just speaking at one level? Or are they emphasizing certain words? Because that you can get a lot of information from how they're speaking and how they're embodying that conversation that you're having with them. Another technique that's brought up by the book is called the accusation audit. And this is where learning from past experiences is very important, because you want to know what other people are assuming about your product, your service, your offering, so that when it comes to the negotiation table and you feel like the other person, so it's important, you have to feel like the other person is making these assumptions, because you don't want to bring up these assumptions with somebody that's not feeling that way. So if you feel like the conversation is going in a way where maybe they're making this assumption about my product, my service, my offering, let me bring it up before they do. Let me bring up their concerns and their worries and take ownership and show them the way around them, so that you take that power away from them where they can't make that excuse, make that accusation. You're saying, hey, I understand you probably have issues in trusting other financial advisors because all they want to do is sell you these products and they don't really take care of you, your well-being, and the well-being of your family. But let me show you how I'm different. Let me show you how my products are different. Let me showcase how other customers have been happy with the services that I'm providing. So if you grab that accusation before they're able to throw it at you and you show them, hey, I know that this is a difficult decision. I know that this is something that maybe you're nervous about engaging in. Let me have a conversation with you so you understand that I understand your worries and I'm here to show you why you shouldn't be worried. So have that conversation when it's relevant. Bring it up ahead so that they see that you're being fully transparent and you are trying to understand and be empathetic towards how they could potentially be feeling, and trying to calm their worries or trying to answer their queries, whatever that might be, those doubts that they're having, those feelings that they could be having prior to the conversation. Bring it up and use that accusation audit in order to help them understand you a little bit better. Now, I've found the technique of bending reality, quote unquote, a little salesy, in my opinion. And he talks about talking to people with their potential loss. So trying to engage in that FOMO. And I believe there is a delicate balance when you're using this technique. And I had a conversation last week during a workshop where I was able to engage in that FOMO a little bit, but not push it so far as how some of the examples in the book show. So let's say he's having a negotiation. He says, you're going to get $100,000 if you agree to this. And he reframes it with, if you don't agree with this, you're going to lose out on $100,000. But approaching the conversation there, it did feel a little bit salesy to me. And with the conversation that I had last week, we were talking about doing door to door and visiting certain industries. So let's say I'm out doing door to door and I'm visiting a bunch of attorneys in the area, and I go and I say, hi, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm visiting other attorneys in the area offering this good or service that is going to help your practice. Now, if they are in the same area as other attorneys that are competing with them, they might get that FOMO. What if I don't engage with this person now and they go to my competition and they engage in the service and ultimately it works out for them and it benefits them? That's not good for me. So there are different ways to approach this bending of reality, as Voss calls it. But I believe for myself, it's very delicate delicate balance when you're engaging in that conversation. And you need to really word your sentences, your conversation carefully to make sure that it doesn't come out too salesy and they put their guard up because they know that all you're trying to do is convince them on the sale, even though that is what you're trying to do. But what you want to do is maybe approach it from a FOMO perspective, or I am building value and these are the benefits to you, where you highlight that they don't currently have them. So these are the benefits that this product, service, or offering could bring to you that you currently don't have. So you're still adding that portion of negativity where they realize, actually, yes, I'm not doing any of these things. Could I be benefiting by doing some of these things? And you're bending the reality in that way so that they start to visualize what it would look like with and without the offering that you have.
We've learned some techniques on how to improve our negotiation skills. Please join me in welcoming Susan Bork with Bork Works. Susan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. I am Susan Bork. My company is Bork Works. And what I do is I help you ask for what you want and get what you need with more success and less stress. And that's through negotiating effectively. So I can work with you individually. I can work with your staff to help improve your bottom line. And also, negotiation training is great to improve employee engagement. People really love to learn skills that not only help them be more effective in their job at work, but also skills that are going to help them be more effective in their personal lives.
That's amazing. And this book actually speaks to that because it talks a lot about when you're listening to somebody to actually understand what they're saying. And some of the techniques they shared, for example, the mirroring technique was a great way to show somebody, hey, I know I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm trying to understand it. Please elaborate it a little bit more. What other techniques do you have out there that can help somebody convey that to the person that they're speaking to that's not necessarily mirroring? And as well, what can they do when they may not necessarily agree with what the person's saying?
So I think mirroring is a really interesting technique because for a few people, it's very easy. And for a lot of people, it's very difficult because you're really just saying the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody has said. And if you do it with an upward inflection, a question, you'll tend to get an answer that's more like a yes or no. Whereas if you use a flat inflection, you'll often get people they'll either say what they were saying, they'll continue and give you more. Excuse me. So though it's interesting, and if it doesn't feel comfortable for you, anyone, I would recommend that you really use it in low stakes situations and just try to get used to using it once in a conversation rather than using it all the time, because then it gets noticeable. And the key is for it to be sort of subtle. So that's just my take on mirroring for what it's worth. Now, your question was, what other techniques are there to demonstrate that you're listening? And a couple of them fall under techniques that people have probably learned in other contexts, and it's often called active listening. So when you paraphrase what somebody has said, so you're taking the gist of it, summarizing it, and that's a way for them to say, oh, that's what I said, or no, that isn't what I said, you misunderstood. It's useful because if they confirm that what you've paraphrased reflects their intent or what they thought they were communicating, then they feel like you were listening to them. If you've done it inaccurately in their view, that's still good because then they're going to give you the information you need, whatever, correct you, right? So it's not that they don't think you were listening, they just think you missed some things that are important to them. The other thing you can do is summarize, right? That's the more like, so what I hear you saying is, and then you're really trying to repeat back what they're saying. Something else that can indicate that you've been listening is when you ask a question that feeds off of what they just said, right? That relates to what they said. Could you tell me more about? Could you expand on? That kind of thing.
Those 3 things really speak to the fact, hey, I'm listening to what you're saying. I understand, or I'm trying to understand. And I think people need to remember that even if you don't understand, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to mirror, paraphrase, or summarize, because ultimately what you're trying to say is, I'm trying to understand. So please help me understand. And you're communicating that to the other person, and they're going to respect the fact that you're trying to understand that. And I like what you said about using mirroring in the low stakes situations, because I've actually found myself with certain high level individuals whereby they don't appreciate that mirroring technique, and it actually frustrates them sometimes because it makes them think that you're not understanding what they're saying. So when you're in those higher stakes situations, the ones that you just mentioned should work really well. Is there anything else that you can do in those high stakes situations with those individuals that are a little bit more, I don't want to say type A because it's not always a type A personality, but it's the ones that don't appreciate you asking after they've already explained themselves?
If you don't understand, going back to what you said, if there's something you don't understand, you definitely want to ask a follow-up question. If there's, I think, paraphrasing or summarizing, they sometimes if that phrase, what I hear you saying is, sets people off. So you can just say, this is my understanding, right? Can you confirm? You help me out here. And then you might also try paraphrasing with them. They might respond to that more because it's a variety. It's not just their words back. So some of those things may help. And I think when you're talking to somebody, if you're trying to figure out what to say next or a great question that Coach Michael Bungay Stanier, who wrote the Coaching Habit, he's got a great question. He calls it the AWE question, and it's "and what else?" So I think that when at a loss, if you're just trying to buy some time or get some more information, you think you understand well enough, ask "and what else?" Because for those high-level individuals, it gets them thinking, what else do I need? And it may give you some information that's very useful to you.
And it allows for that pause in time that they're giving you as well as they're thinking, is there anything else that I need to communicate with this person? And I like that you said, use different techniques. That also requires you paying attention, which a lot of said in the book, you have to pay attention to that rule, that 7:38:55 rule, that a lot of communication isn't just verbal. You have to pay attention to their body language and everything else that they're saying, their tone, because that will give you an idea of it is a good idea to mirror them, or I should paraphrase with them and learn from those experiences to carry you forward. One other technique that he mentions in the book is labeling emotions. And I often struggle with this, and I continue to improve myself on this. So what would you recommend for people to be able to understand emotions a little bit better so that they can label them and use them in situations like this to engage in that conversation?
One exercise, again, that you can try and do in more low stakes situations or even with yourself is to pull up a feelings wheel, emotions wheel. And what that does is it goes from very basic emotions that we can all identify. I think I read somewhere the research is that for ourselves, we can identify maybe a maximum of 6 emotions. And for other people, we might be able to identify 3. And the ones that most people can identify, though not always, is happy, sad, angry, afraid. So you can, and if you look at it though, culturally, sad and angry are sometimes difficult to distinguish, both in terms of facial expressions and also even in context, because certain cultures are more likely to respond, say, to frustration with sadness rather than anger. I know that's difficult for Americans to realize, but actually, yes. We as Americans, I think, tend to respond to being frustrated, for example, with anger. So what these emotion wheels do is they take some of the big emotions and then gradually become more and more granulated. So is your anger frustration? Is it resentment? Is it some of the things that I'm not thinking of? Are you sad because you're despairing? Are you sad because you're depressed? Are you afraid because you're anxious? Are you afraid because you're terrified? So beginning to actually try and go to that next level down. Start by moving. Can you move down? Can you say, I'm sad, actually, I'm not so sad so much as, or I'm sad and I'm anxious, kind of whatever. So that's one, though getting more in touch with your own emotions is going to help you then perhaps offer some labels that might work for other people. And again, being more granular, you have a higher percentage on the one hand of being wrong. On the other hand, then it gives them they'll correct you perhaps more precisely.
You're giving them the language, so you're using an emotion language to engage with them, and they're more likely to engage back with you with that emotion language. And I think this technique, and thank you for that resource, I'm going to look it up myself. I think this technique is going to help people that are hard to read as well, because often you can't read emotion. And with technology nowadays, it's harder to read emotion. So by learning to name emotions and engaging in that emotion type conversation, where we're talking about how we're feeling, but we're talking about how we're feeling in a constructive way so that we can understand each other. What techniques do you think people can use in the digital world, especially like, say right now we're in Zoom, you can only see this much of me. You can't see how expressive, as much as I try to be, you can't see how expressive I am. And then as well, you have those email communications and maybe phone call communications with people from different cultures, because now, as you mentioned, we're connected to people all over the world. So what can people do to improve that understanding as they're having these conversations and these negotiations when they may not be in person?
I think it's challenging because, again, we get more and more clues. We get clues from written communication, gives you one set of cues, but it's asynchronous. So that's the good news, because you can often take time and really craft, right, what you're trying to say and have other people review it so that is the intent coming through effectively, that kind of thing. Because sometimes if we're too quick with our text or our email, it can come off as being brusque, right? Or we may miss something. So all those, you kind of craft things a little more if you're putting it in writing. When you're on a telephone call, right, that gives you some indication. And in fact, let me ask you something. Can you tell if you're on the phone with somebody, can you tell if they're checking their email, for example?
Yeah, you can tell if they're doing something else for sure, because of the amount of time it takes them to respond, or if they're just, you can tell they're doing other things.
So they can tell if you are too. Zoom and other video platforms give you some of that visual information. You're still not quite getting I don't know what it is when you're in the room with somebody, that sort of in-person 3D. And I think you need to figure out what part of the negotiation or the communication needs to happen in person, as it were, even if it's over video. If it's a long-term relationship, ideally at some point at the beginning, best, somewhere during it, you are in the same room with somebody. So you can have that, break bread with them or something like that. Otherwise, if you're doing this over Zoom, it's finding ways to connect. What are things you have in common? Where not a lot of small talk, but maybe a little bit, depending on somebody's comfort level, and doing and putting more effort into that communication, those techniques we talked about at the beginning about I'm listening. I'm really trying to listen to what you're saying.
We actually spoke about this recently in another book review we did, which was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which comes to asking the right questions so that you can truly understand what the person's saying, but also sort of engage with them in an emotional level. What motivates them? What are they trying to say? What question can I ask in order to motivate them to give me an answer, but give me an answer that gives me additional information besides the words that they are speaking? Susan, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. If any of our viewers would like to connect with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So my last name is spelled Borke. So you can reach me. I don't think there are too many of those, but I'm connected to you. So that's how they can find me. And then also my website is my last name, Borke, the word works, WORKS.com. So borkworks.com.
Please feel free to reach out to Susan if you have additional questions or would like to connect with her on a different level. Thank you again for joining in, and don't forget to join us next week.